Okay, thank you. We should start. Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here, especially on this day when the game is going on. Thank you. And before we start, let me say a few words. I have a few announcements. Next Tuesday, the poet Jane Herschel is going to read here, and she also gave, that is the low poetry series, memorial series. So it's our program's poetry series. So try to be here if you can. And also a few of our alums and students have won some prizes lately. Okay, Danny Aberigber, I hope I pronounced his last name right, and he won the Binghamton Poetry Prize that was sponsored by the University of Wisconsin, and that carries a cash prize, and also the book manuscript will be published this year. It was a huge honor to him and also to our program. Two poets, one is our current student, Emily Yaremchuk, Yaremchuk, won the Mick Imler Prize. That was a big poetry prize in England. And also a former alum of ours, a former student, Eric McCarry, also got the same prize. They are tied at the second place. So they split the prize, each getting £1,000. And on the fiction part, we have a few laurels as well. And a recent alum, Dario Suarez, I think, their last name is Suarez. He won the Spokane Fiction Prize for his short story collection, Another Kind of Solitude. And that also carries a cash prize, and the book will be published by Willow Spring Books. So that was a major step for him. And another recent alum, Neha Kamda, just received the Stegner Fellowship. That will enable her to work for 2 years, write for 2 years at Stanford. So she already completed her first book. I assume this will help her write another book. And then another fiction writer who graduated 2 years ago, Waki Wang, who published the novel Chemistry. She won the Whiting Award and also the Pan Hemingway Award for first fiction. So those are our recent laurels. and for tonight's event, the basic principle is we only include faculty members who have been teaching this year. So we know there are so many friends who, one way or another, have been involved with our program, but we only have the teaching faculty this year as readers. And also we have a recent graduate student, usually a poet or fiction student, share his or her work with us as well. This year, it is a poet. We have Alice Manzis as the poet reader. Last year, we have Waki Wang as the fiction reader. So Robert Pinsky, as her mentor, is going to introduce her. She's the first reader. Then we will go by the alphabetical order.
I'm very proud that our program always includes a recent alum in the evening of the faculty reading. It's in the spirit of what a creative writing program can bring to a university we're all artists together. We're not just poets and students. And Arlis Menzies embodies that very well. Before I say a bit about Arlis, let me amplify the announcement that Ha-Jin made about the reading by Jane Hirschfield and Natasha Hakimi on Tuesday. It won't be in this building. It will be in the Howard Gottlieb Center Tuesday evening. It'll be in the library. Arlis Menzies writes about subjects that are often gone to and challenging, and we often fail at them. To write, and I don't know what you'll read tonight, but things that I remember very well from her time as a student here, when she worked with Carl Kirchway and me. Arlis writes very well and penetratingly about families, about marriage, about children and parents, and she brings a kind of more than domestic perspective and intensity to those subjects. Maybe her bio contributes to that. She teaches adult ed at the Somerville Center for Adult Learning Experience. She grew up with an intense religious background, I believe in Kentucky. She's been a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine, so that the surface of those universal and somewhat treacherously familiar subjects, that surface has underneath it a terrific imagination and also a wealth of varied experience. I'm really proud to introduce Arlis Menzies.
Thank you. I really love that. This is full of all of that. So this is my first time writing kind of a series of poems together that carry a narrative thread. And I'm going to leave you at somewhat of an unsettled point, but maybe that will motivate you to look for my poems in the future, because because the cycle of the work that I've been doing lands on a much more resolved note. So the first poem is called Even in the Dark, It's True. Slipoy, blind. A word I learned to say early in Russian because family is the first topic students learn to talk about. It's like I'm 5 again and trying to explain to the neighbor girl why my dad's not at work. In Russian, I sound like a child too. I have a large family. Mother is beautiful. Father is blind. It occurs to me that I could reinvent myself here, and the relief is immediate, church doors pushed open onto a spring night. I remember this feeling from the first time my sister proposed we lie about them. I was going into 6th grade, she 4th, and every year we wrote on an index card, name, parents' names, occupations, phone numbers at work. The worst was reading these aloud. I had mustered the guts the year before to ask if I could be skipped. Mrs. Deardorff looked stunned, as though behind her huge eyes and rouged cheeks she'd never known shame, or met a kid who came from a shaky place. She let me put my head on the desk, told everyone my name, and that I wasn't well. Before starting school the next fall, my sister and I wrote a dozen note cards out loud above our beds. Alan and Allison, concert cellist, pediatrician. Bill and Lydia, pastor, psychiatric nurse. We base them on the truth, knowing, as children do, how decent lies work. It takes a long time to feel like an adult speaking Russian. And by then, I don't talk about my family. I learned to talk about свои работы, my work. O literatura, которую преподаю, the literature I teach. I don't learn rare genetic disease or supplemental security income. Having a look. What changes have you noticed? The doctor asked. Just not being able to read as well, I said. Anything else? I grasped memory's thread and began to follow it back. Well, I almost had an accident driving the other day, and I'm pretty sure it was my mistake. But don't we all do that? Get distracted? In the bar, I yanked incredulously on a locked door, although the exit was well marked and close. And I tripped on my daughter's train set, sent the dining car into the wooden trees, but played it off like I was Godzilla, and stomped forward to take out a bridge. My recounting stopped. I saw my dad as he crossed the fields of carpet between the living room and hall. It was Christmas, and we had opened all our presents. They were everywhere, like urban sprawl. Dolls with stiff curled lashes lifting over blue glass eyes, my music box, the twirling dancer in white organza. Tiny springs and gears, accessories, motors, batteries. And here he came, arms outstretched, his resolution. All right, coming through. We scrambled like servants to a king to clear a path. It was another natural disaster. We knew what to do, but in our holiday excitement, we had abandoned our positions, lost the protocol for evacuation, misappropriated funds, and betrayed our constituents. When he kicked a toy and stumbled, he would never swear with the usual words. He would shout, "Bunko!" and sometimes, "Oh, praise the Lord!" And we'd wait for any aftershock before surveying the damage. A certain percentage of every good thing always goes to taxes, but we couldn't make sense of this accounting or accept it yet. My brother cried, went to his room with the pieces of his crushed robot, wires exposed, still transmitting electricity to the pulsing lights illuminating the red chest plate. The doctor is back. Do you see those sparkling deposits on this picture of your retina? Those are called drusen, German for geodes. We only see those on patients of advanced age. It could be nothing, but we'll need to do more tests. Inherited retinal disorders. After a series of tests the doctor uses to access a long hall of dark cages, he unlocks one for me. Stargardt's disease. He has an assistant collar and leash it. She pries open my fist, puts the leash in my palm, and pinches off these terms with a polite smile. Take it home for the months until your appointment at Mass Eye and Ear. They can help you complete the adoption process. But I have children to take care of, I shout. But I'm yanked out the door and no one hears. I get the thing into the car without crying and call Brian. I hear him trying to lay track fast with help from the internet, as I and my new pet, or rather owner, barrel into the future unhampered by our parked car. All I can hear is, legally blind, 2,200 to 2,400, in, on average, 10 years. My dad has a similar breed, or maybe it's the same. They took him in when he was 20, having crashed his motorcycle, sober on an empty road. They called it retinitis pigmentosa. It has a gradual system of overthrow. You have some time to build a visual foundation. You think you're in control for a while. At least I fell in love with his face, can replay the pattern of the lines on his palms. At least I know by heart my first full take of our baby's newborn shapes, their half-closed, contented, sleepy eyes, noses slopes, perfect lips, so individual. How much of believing is seeing. An empty Smirnoff bottle gets caught between my sneakers, and I'm startled by the hollow kabobbling on the gritty sidewalk, newly cleared of snow. So, I will be blind then, for half my life, half empty. Half full, how much can I keep of what I've seen? Can I keep the line of your upper lip only visible when you've shaven? A line I'm not sure I've memorized since you've almost always worn facial hair. I'll try to fix it in my mind the minute I get home. I'm not sure how much wall space there is inside of me, or how to sort and count all the pictures I want to keep and see regularly. I'm already designing my interior. There will be no cornered countertops or desks, only sanded smooth and polished wood. Although my ears aren't broken, I imagine it completely silent. It's a trick our brains do, get confused about what's gone. When they see my dad is blind, strangers raise their voices to communicate with him. It happens that standing close to both of us, they tell me what to say to him, as though he's deaf. I'm sure they'll do the same to me. I'm doing it to myself already. I shout in my own ear, "Pay attention now! Memorize!" As though I'm finishing the last of it, and the rest of living will be tripping on empties. To Brian. Everyone knows the first heartbreak is being born. The limitless is limited, pushed out through a small opening, uniquely capable of expanding under certain conditions, but not free of ramifications, a cost to someone or everyone, really. A bane, a boon, we are born. And our love is tenderized through this first miracle, first calamity. So you came to love me, both of us seasoned by loss and gratification, and we continue to give up and be gifted again and again, as we are commanded. Love one another, that your own joy may be full. And you love me so well, cradling my loss for a while, smoothing my sweat-soaked hair, your lips close to my ear, cooing. And when it's time, you take my hand, help me onto my two legs, steady my hips, remind me that you are with me. And we go on, out to meet even greater love. Thanks.
Our next reader is Leslie Epstein, and he has been teaching at BU for more than 40 years, also directed the program for more than 3 decades. He is a great teacher and well-known teacher. In fact, there are many students who became published authors his students, myself included. We all benefit from his presence in the program. And Leslie has published numerous fiction books, such as The King of Jews, Cerebral Drive. And he is also a playwright, in fact. He earned his doctorate from Yale in theater. So, in fact, he has written several plays. Tomorrow there's a new play will be read. A group of actors will read his new play, Little Swallow. It's about Stalin and his daughter and her lover. It's very, very. This is the first time, so it will be read at Boston BU Theater. I think on Commonwealth 9:49, you're right? What time? 7:30, 7:30 at 9:49, Commonwealth Ave. So try to be there if you can. And lately, he has been working on a collection of short stories, link stories. I read most of them. Really, these are very unique, very passionate, and very resonant. In a way, they are kind of a medication on the history, especially the violence of modern history. And several of the stories have been accepted or published in reputable magazines. So I assume that he's going to read from that collection. Let us welcome Leslie.
Well, indeed, I am going to. It's next Wednesday, the 18th,
Oh, I'm sorry.
at the Boston Playwrights Theater, and my students better be there.
Next Wednesday.
You know, it's very nice. The last person to walk into this room was my student from almost 40 years ago. Right, Sharon? Yeah, but that's a very nice thing to see your student from 4 decades ago to put up with an evening like this. So it's good to see you, Sharon. Yes, I have been writing for some years now a book of stories about an aged music teacher in Cambridge who was a Holocaust victim. His parents disappeared in the war. He went to Israel or Palestine then as a boy. He became a world-famous child prodigy, won a big prize in Santiago Prize in Chile, where the woman he married turned the pages of the score when he was playing. His son died in New York, and he stopped his career. He then only taught music instead of playing it. That's about all you have to know. I think he stopped playing. Now he has stopped even teaching because of terrible arthritis. His hands, his fingers look like root vegetables, he thinks. And so he now just goes to the library to read. And he met a librarian there and tells her lots of stories. And she, like Desdemona, falling in love with Othello for the tales he told. Something like that happens here. And she, her name is Virginia, makes up her mind she has to repay him by telling him some story. The story she tells him is one I read here 2 years ago about her father going off in a fishing boat, and the boat comes back, but he's not on it. And that happened to her when she was a young girl. So she tells him that story, and but she does it by inviting him to dinner and getting rid of her son for the night. And when she tells him this story, he knows that he has to tell her another story, and that's how we're going to begin. I told her how, aged 11 in Palestine, I would go to the big bulletin board in Tel Aviv. I was looking for my mother's name, Iris, Barbakov or Shabilian, her maiden name. The large echoing room never closed because who knew when some lost soul fluttering in on a slip of paper might be found. There were times, Miss Virginia, many times, that I spent the night curled in a corner, hoping that my mother or the spelled out letters of her name would appear on the slabs of cork that were glued to the wall. She leaned toward me, her mouth half open. I told her then how the day I had been waiting for arrived. The name, Barbakov, not so common, was on the board. On green paper, that meant a male. I was sure they made a mistake. The tag said I, Barbakov. It had to be Iris. They had meant to use blue, turquoise blue, as if, you see, those who were lost had tumbled from the sky. I went to the officer, a female in her brown uniform. I handed her over the slip of paper. I believed one had to have perfect eyes to be in the defense forces, but she put on glasses. She told me that Isidore Barbikoff was working in the apple orchards near the Sea of Galilee. I could not grasp what she had said. My father. He had never returned to our street, not even after the war. He had been erased from my mind. The eyes, the eyelashes, the line of his mustache, gone. But he had endured. No choice for me now. I had to continue my story. How I rode up to the Galilee in a pre-war Leland bus with melons rolling in the aisle, chickens squawking in the luggage rack. How I spent the better part of the next day searching for the kibbutz and then for the orchard. I found it a little before nightfall. I asked for Barbikoff. There, someone said, pointing a good way off where a ladder was leaning against a tree. Miss Virginia held up the palm of her hand. She said, Stop for just a minute. My heart is beating. I think it must be beating as fast as that 11-year-old boy's. I can't help thinking I'm hearing something out of the Bible. Jacob's ladder, with the angels going up and the angels coming down. All right, Mr. Barbikoff. The minute is up. I reached the bottom rung. At the top, a man was leaning out, a bit precariously, retrieving the fruit. I waited until I thought it was safe, or to gather my courage. Then I called out my father's name. The man turned. He looked down. I looked up. Dark skin, eyes almost black, no mustache. This was a different man. Half an Arab, perhaps, with a narrow brow. It was not my father. Miss Virginia sat without moving. She held her head quite steady, perhaps to make certain that the tears did not spill from her eyes. She spoke with great care. Do you see, my dear, that to the end of our lives, you and I will be waiting for a dead person to appear? With that, she rose. I stood, so we faced each other. She touched my sleeve. She said, Come. Her lips were trembling. I saw a thing I somehow had not noticed before, a swath of freckles across the bridge of her nose. The lashes of her eyes, long and black, without cosmetics, fluttered a little. She tightened her grip on my arm. Thus was I led not into the kitchen where the meal had been cooked, and not to the table where it had been laid out, but to a small, square bedroom at the end of the hall. The wallpaper was faded, dim blue and dim gold fleur-de-lis. While I watched, she turned her back. I understood she was unbuttoning her blouse. Her elbows were visible as she accomplished this task. Then she stepped out of her black and white skirt. In her underclothes, she looked over her shoulder. Will you do the same, my dear? Will you take off your things? I wanted to say that I had a wife, Carlotta, who would be waiting. I wanted to say that I was a coward and that for the making of love I was much too old. But then her brassiere fell away, and the sight of her back and the spine of her back touched me. I did not wish to leave her alone. I took off my jacket, my shirt, my trousers. I was aware of a humming in my ears. That, too, said Miss Virginia, and I knew that without having pointed or nodded, she meant my undershorts. She slipped from her last garment as well and turned, so that we faced each other naked. I was startled by the whiteness of her belly and the blackness of the hair beneath it. It was as if her skirt had left an impression. She walked to me and lifted her face. Miss Virginia, I said, this cannot be. My hair, my ears, the gold in my teeth, these terrible hands. You think you understand? No, dear man, you don't understand. She took one of those hands and led me to the bed. Again she raised her face. I bent to kiss it. Then she sat on the cover and pulled me by her. We lay then side by side. My poor penis lay against my leg, too old, and also too frightened. I started to say these cringing words aloud. She said, "I know, my darling Ernst, I know." She began to touch me with the flat of her hand and then the tips of her fingers. This she repeated for many moments, while a train of thoughts like donkeys went head to tail through my mind. Would her son, the boy Billy, return? What was I to tell Carlotta, undoubtedly at that moment pacing the floor of our flat? This gift I was about to receive, was it happiness? On this subject I had no opinion. About unhappiness I was better informed. It was the hell of being unable to love. Matters more mundane, the smell of the abandoned meal curling toward us. Would the underground train still be running when I wished to return home? Would the door of that home, but the woman beside me now said, "There, you see, I had come alive." We kissed again. She lay fully on her back, and I rolled on top of her and felt the heels of her feet on my buttocks, guiding me in. There rose from her the smell of her childhood, as it must have come to her each evening when her father walked from the fish pier to where she was waiting at the end of the road. I do not know how many hours we slept. When I opened my eyes, I saw by the faint light of her clock that she was raised on one elbow, looking at me. "How happy you must have been," she said, "when you were the boy who played music." And that was true. In Santiago, in the heat, the blaze of the sun, I felt close to the girl who turned the pages and wiped my brow, so that the salt of my sweat would not blind me. A thread bound me to her. When in the recording studio, number 8H, Toscanini moved his baton upward, I knew that I levitated from my chair, not visibly, only a part of a millimeter. When the baton moved to the left or to the right, calling on strings, calling on woodwinds, I moved in some fraction that way as well. We also were tied. There was a similar bond with those in the audience, whether the 5,000 in the sun of Santiago or in the darkness of the concert hall. When all the child pianist could see was the shine on a pair of eyeglasses or a white shirt collar or the scintillation of a diamond that hung from a woman's neck. And of course the invisible thread stretched from Brahms and then to Schumann and then to dear Mendelssohn and to Bach and back still and back, perhaps to a boy, a shepherd, as he played on his pipe. I do not include the birds in the trees. I was bound to all the creators of music, who for some years in my youth I brought back to life. I came out of this reverie. Miss Virginia had not moved. With her eyes under their long curving lashes, she was still looking at me. I reached up with my hopeless fingers to touch her cheek. Thank you. Thank you. Well, now I have a real pleasure because I'm going to introduce Ha-Jin, our next reader. As you know, he's a novelist of the highest order, a great world novelist, and such a productive one, almost a book a year. He called me a wonderful teacher. There's a wonderful teacher, as all his students will attest. He's a beloved teacher, wonderful colleague, wonderful friend, not just to us, but to his students and to literature, I think. I first met Ha-Jin, oddly enough, 1991 or 2 at a Penn poetry reading, I think, and which is odd enough, but something about the way he read the poetry, and then he said, "Can I sit in on your class?" And I never say yes, but I just said yes. And so now his latest book is right here, a new book of poems from Ha-Jin. called A Distant Center. And here is Haijian.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to read 3 short poems. Let me just say a few words about this book. In fact, because my wife has been ill, and so for years I couldn't start a novel. You had to inhabit the book, the project, but I just couldn't do that. So I began to write poems. Initially, I thought I would write these in Chinese as drafts, and then I would rewrite them. So, but once I started, I realized Chinese was still my first language. So these poems should be finished in Chinese. So that's why I published a lot of poems in Chinese in recent years. And eventually, I published 2 books of poems in Chinese, and then I rewrote some of the poems in English. That's how it came out as a book. So I'm very lucky because this is rather convoluted, the whole process, and there was a lot of uncertainty. But I'm glad it became a book, so the labor is not wasted. The 3 poems I'm going to read, each of them in a way reflect a literary tradition. And the first one is A Center. When the great American author, Willa Cather, when she published her first book, and she befriended another older writer, Sarah Jewett, who wrote The Country for Pointed Firs. She lived in Maine. So they started correspondence. In one of her letters, Jewett urged Willa Cather. She said, "You must find your quiet center and write from there." In fact, that is a piece of great advice, and I was very touched by that. So the poem, in a way, responds to that moment. A center. You must hold your quiet center, where you do what only you can do. If others call you a maniac or a fool, just let them wag their tongues. If some praise your perseverance, don't feel too happy about it. Only solitude is a lasting friend. You must hold your distant center. Don't move, even earth and heaven quake. If others think you are insignificant, that's because you haven't held on long enough. As long as you stay put year after year, eventually you will find a world beginning to revolve around you. This is also, the next poem is called The Lost Moon. Because I couldn't start a novel, I began another prose project, less difficult. I began to work on a biography of the ancient Chinese poet Li Bo. We call it Li Bai. In Chinese, it's called Li Bai, but in English, he had several names. Most common is Li Bo. And so I spent 2 years working on his poems and his biographical material. I found the Asians, especially a poet like him, they were so easy to be entertained. They really enjoy life. And if a moon is bright and big, then they would celebrate. They would have a party just for that reason. And so I was very touched by that. The happiness was so easy for them. And this also made me think that maybe the moon was different at the time from ours, bigger and brighter. So it made me think a lot. So that's why I wrote this poem, okay? The Lost Moon. Like you, I too lost my moon. Wide-eyed, I look a smiling face to be the source of all light and hope, which led me into a gloomy forest. Since then, I can no longer see the wonders in the sky. However hard I drudge and search, I cannot find the hills I have climbed. Now there's no difference between day and night. I spend them on my computer and cell phone. In fact, I knew long ago that the smiling face was a mere mirage. Yet I can no longer gaze up at the moon as my ancestors did from horseback by the roadside to relay a word home or to a friend. I have landed in a place my ancestors never heard of. I need to grow a new backbone. And in the ancient Chinese poets, they view the moon as a kind of steady, fast communicator because they assume that all the friends and families and they would watch the moon at the same time. So you can relay a word, communicate with people at home or friends. So that's why, but that part is lost as well. And the last poem I'm going to read is, in a way, I think some of you must know a poem by the great modern Greek poet Kavafi. There's one called As Much as You Can. It's a very short poem, and the speaker in the poem urges his friends not to degrade his life by too much contact with the world. So this poem echoes that sentiment. In a way, it was inspired by that. At least you don't need to appear everywhere, attending parties and conferences randomly. That would show you are still diffident about your art and would also debase yourself. People who see you in person might think you are too common, your achievement due to luck, like a blind cat that stumbles on a dead mouse. Your frequent appearance would dishearten others because you exist far away, at the end of their imagination. You should be watched but not reached. Look, this scarf of stars, which one of them doesn't shine or die alone? The light also comes from a deep indifference. Okay, our next reader is, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Our next reader is Carl Kirchwey. Carl joined us more than 3 years ago as a full professor in poetry writing on our MFA faculty. And so he has published, I think, 6 or 7 books, really all very, very full, big books. And I think there's always an international dimension in his work, partly perhaps because he lived in Europe and elsewhere, outside the States, for many years. His most recent book is called Stumbling Blocks, Roman Poems. All the poems, in fact, about Roman history, historical figures, historical moments. I read the book, was very impressed by the rigor and the craft of the book. I think if you read the poems, you'll be impressed as well. Recently, Carl was also appointed to be the dean of the humanities at BU. So that really it's a big job for him. And in fact, with his help from the college, I think we will continue to thrive and prosper. We do need a lot of help from the college. Let us welcome Carl. Thank you.
Thanks to Shui Fei for that introduction, and just to say that it's very nice to be back in my creative home. As he remarked, I'm spending most of my life across the way in administration these days. At the risk of being perverse, I am not going to read anything about Rome tonight. I'm going to read 4 poems, and they are all, I believe, resolutely set in this country. And in fact, gosh, pretty much in this city, more or less. The first one is about a winter that doesn't want to end. Why not? February thaw. Tell the facts over. Tell them over again. Tell them when the first pulse of snow melt beneath a lens of ice speaks in small guttering sounds of warmer days. Repeat the motions, but give them a different outcome. That morning long ago, he dressing for work, she not yet up, the copy of Bertrand Russell still where she had left it on the night table. Give her a vision of eternity, but bring her back. Let her rise, throw off the gold silk coverlet and start down the distance between there and here, invited by such tender days of midwinter toward a generation she never met. I will go out to meet her on that road, recovering so much between us, smiling, breathless with the wonder of the thing. What we had thought forbidden is allowed, till her steps drag with the appalling frost, the debt of years she can never outgrow, as the pulse slows and stops, conniving snow drifts gently down, and once more she is lost. Madmen. The point was not the show. It was never the show. The point was the habit of the show, as the child in front of the black and white could have told you 50 years ago, balancing the many mansions of a TV dinner tray on his knees to keep the greater darkness at bay beyond the cathode light. We will miss them. Peggy, Don, dishonest Peter, Bert, Joan with the amazing bust, and Roger, who organized our lives season after season, Betty from Bryn Mawr, and Sally, her daughter, with the dark brows, solemn and just the age we were at the time, their imagination greater than our own. Our children ask, was it really like that? Sucking booze like honey out of the rock? The lit cigarette? The constant promiscuous sex? The men wore garters, no trolls, no HIV. They drove without a seatbelt. But after all, this was our parents' generation, and much of what went on with them was hidden. There was no pantyhose. We remember some of the brands, Lucky Strike, Canadian Club, Du Maurier, as being authentic, but the body count seems artificially low. 1 coronary, 1 suicide, 1 stroke, and only a single case of lung cancer? Our parents could not, by now, 0 for 4, outwit mortality so. We also liked the way the lives of history, JFK, Medgar, Malcolm, Martin, Bobby, braided up with theirs. As to who went down on whom, or which phone ringing went unanswered, we knew they lived their lives indifferent to us. Breathlessly, we awaited the consequences. Our predictions failed to contain them. Only in the 1970s were certain social experiments, thought to be controlled social experiments, possible that could be so misguided as what I am about to describe, being an urban studies internship offered by an elite prep school. The Children's Crusade. Once, I spent a winter term in Boston on an internship in children's advocacy. The lawyers there didn't know what to do with me with my long hair and my gauche manners on the phone. So I decorated my cubicle with mottos: give a man a fish, teach a man to fish, and trudged out through the cold and slush to bird dog the staff in their righteousness. I was living with a prep school cohort at a settlement house in the South End, slumming it. I was just another dumb blonde. And one night, my friends queued up Deep Throat. But I was in love for the first time. The tongue in cheek and in each other's laps. Did they think I meant Country Matters, perhaps? There were catcalls when I left the room. Sometimes I went to the library for silence. I was just as white and new as the Philip Johnson wing. I sat at a table and waited for spring, when my love gave me the quietus at a dance. The strobe made her remote as the moon. Outside, there was bussing and Louise Day Hicks. There was meltwater from rusting girders and falling bricks, and legs windmilling in the combat zone's neon. I wrote things down without knowing why. Once, I found a note, folded and scented too, at my place that said, "I have been watching you. Your sweetness and your manliness inflame me. I would like to take you in my mouth. If you would like this, meet me." I read no further that day, for I fled with my few silly books through the arch inscribed, "Free to all," as if in danger. I was not, except from my own pieties. It took me years to get to that place of having words say what I meant, honestly and without equivocating. The lawyers gave me lunch for a send-off. Their gratitude clearly mingled with relief. I had no idea of what we were celebrating. As you doubtless know, cremains are cremated human remains. Cabin in the woods. The way is clear through the pasture down to my cabin in the woods that has been closed since November. On either side, the pale geranium nods, and a wild rose has decided to volunteer. The field mice will have wintered over in style in that last outpost of my family's history, with the stained liquor carton, the splayed file, the box of cremains that is empty, the mahogany desk too big to fail. They will have made nests from each medium, nibbled off the carpet's fringe, and shredded the padded pericardium containing the gold pocket watch that kept time long before my time. Once, I fed off this just as avidly, ransacking it without conscience in a theft the making seemed to justify, grifting others' lives for their evidence. Now, all I feel is the vulnerability. With leaf shade and summer deepening, soon the place will be invisible from the road. I dread the descent after so long, the ordure and sustenance mingled. I dread the door opening.
Our next reader is Gail Mazur. I've known Gail for more than 30 years, and she has been really a good friend. I think in the Boston poetry community, she's like a saint figure. Really, she started the Black House poetry series, and it has become a kind of poetry center for decades. And she has published many books, and really she's a wonderful poet. And I think the book, Don't Take That Away From Me, that was a finalist for the National Book Award. Really is a very, very striking volume of poetry. Her most recent book is Forbidden City, a book about, I think most of the poems are morning poems. There's always a kind of quiet, elegiac quality in the poems. I also noticed that she was born in Cambridge, and also she basically spent her whole life here. I personally, as a poet, as an exile, as an immigrant, I was fascinated by that. Very few people can have that quality. I guess that might give her work a kind of a serenity that is very unusual, very extraordinary, her own. Let us welcome Gail.
I'm the townie poet. It's great to be here. It's great to be teaching here, my wonderful students, my fabulous colleagues. The first poem I'm going to read is a newer poem, and then I'm going to read a couple of poems from books. This poem really talks about a teacher who made me feel that he saw something in me, which it was impossible for me to consciously take in at the time which was the 50s. It's called That Was Then. You have a Victorian sensibility, my teacher said. He said that as praise, somehow as reassurance. But I wanted to see myself an artist, not priggish, not a prude in love with maybe Matthew Arnold. It would be years before Midwestern boys would challenge me to defend Ginsberg, assuming as an Easterner I'd not only know him but be complicit with him, and maybe Kerouac too. Though so far I'd gone nowhere, just flown to Winnetka with a lacy bridesmaid's dress for my pregnant college friend Susie's wedding. Those boys had got Sue back, where slip-covered sofas were covered in plastic for good measure, and everyone stayed put. And for every guy, a compliant dropout girl. For every girl, a sachet drawer of cashmere sweater sets. It's true, I slouched around campus wearing black turtlenecks and jeans, and carrying my battered Dylan Thomas therapists would one day call my transitional object. Or called it last year. But Ginsberg, Kerouac, beatniks, and moi, which bewildered me. Maybe I'm one too. One what? One what? Years before I'd actually know Alan, avatar of freedoms I was still too unworldly to imagine, then before mind-blowing Hal, before Kaddish, before he was oming in San Francisco, before he was being crowned Prague's Queen of the May. And here Mr. Rinker, 5 foot tall, my first intellectual, who loved me, wrote on my earnest handwritten proofrock paper, "Rejoice that you have written this sentence." What could I know then at 17 about proofrock or despair? I forget the sentence I should have rejoiced over and didn't, but never forgot the evening spread out against the sky, nor I do not think that they will sing to me. Was Mr. R saying I sang to him? 2 outliers after class in the amber light of a high school classroom, a tall girl towering over a bespectacled man, thinking she was the only brooding one, miserable in her senior year at a first-class public school. What was I going to be? Dim question then, not even a question. I, still too dim myself to form the question. What could I be? Just a pretty girl? Oh, please, please not a teacher like my mother and grandmother, or like brilliant, misshapen Mr. Rinker, stuck so unfairly in the wrong place with his only body. Underemployed, I'd say now glibly, but still aching for his frustration, for his bewilderment at my misery. How he did his best to console me, girl weeping by his blackboard, poor girl with no useful tools at her disposal. How he tried. But what could be so wrong, he asked. How could I possibly be unhappy, he said, when you're beautiful? Not the thing I needed then to hear from him, from whose life I'd soon disappear. The part of my life that was lived in art, not in adolescent torment, began really when I met my husband when I was 20, who was an artist, and we kind of grew up together. So I want to read one poem about that. It's not about that, it's actually called Mount Fuji, but it is about that. And it refers to two great Japanese artists, great printmakers, Hokusai and Hiroshige. Hokusai and Hiroshige, my first presents to you, two linen-bound books that closed with loop ribbons and faux ivory clasps. Decades later, we gaped at Fuji from a window of Japan Air and gasped together in Narita, a park so immaculate, white rocks gleamed graphic in a river of gravel. Later still, you'd moved between the floating worlds of ukiyo-e woodcuts and Chinese landscapes whose surfaces entered you as if it had been faded. A draftsman's draftsman, Hokusai, at 70, thought he'd begun to grasp the structures of birds and beasts, insects and fish, of the way plants grow, hoped that by 90 he'd have penetrated to their essential nature, and more, by 100, I will have reached the stage where every dot, every mark I make will be alive. You always loved that resolve, you'd repeat joyfully, Hokusai's utterance of faith in work's possibilities, its reward that at 130 he'd perhaps have learned to draw. In Edo then, his beloved Fuji was seen as the true source of immortality, as for him it was to be. Will you always give me such spectacular gifts, you asked me that day when we were 20. To the makers. And of course, that's an allusion to William Dunbar's Lament for the Makers. But you might recognize 20th century poets that I'm thinking of. To the makers. You were like famous cities with rivers and traffic, with architecture from ingenious eras, with protest marches and festivals, museums and pharmacies, and criminal pleasures. All the essentials needed to endure. Reading you, I revisit your structures of grids and avenues, your alleys. I follow overgrown paths. I revisit the terror and joys of being lost, the ways to court discomfort, to dare chaos, the knowledge of drowning in a pitch-dark harbor. Tyranny and wars advanced in your histories. Also, infirmities of soul and body were your portion. Yet you were not yearning only, not heartbreak only. You were not the loneliest people alive. There was your work, and then you had one another. You spoke with gods and heroes. You cherished your conversations in many languages. It is true, you were secretive, observers, spies, but that was as it has to be. It was only your work you were given to serve. You weren't mere investigators of useless things. The pragmatic seemed no more or less suggestive to you than articles of turbulence or rapture, strands of hair in a basin, light in a dusty stairwell, a pitcher of sangria, woe and laughter, the feel in the hand of a broken thing. Day by day, your lives were a tumult of beginnings. When you began, you couldn't know. This you keep showing me, where your constructions would lead. What you made from the inchoate, muscled and shaped, not toward the monumental, but toward a form of truth that would matter, the inaccessible become necessary. Though I am speaking to you, I'm not alone, nurtured by your art. Even today, you animate the minutiae of the vast, unsigned cosmos. And though the 20th century ended without you, now decades after your precipitate departures, your pages are still touched by many, still touch many, and the lit screens you never used sing your lines. Thank you.
Our next reader is Sigrid Nunez. We are very lucky to have her on our faculty. She teaches in the fall usually, and I think she has been teaching revision. I can't think another person more qualified than she is. I think she's really, to me, I think she's a great prose stylist. I'm saying this because lately, in fact, in recent, almost a year, I've been sampling a lot of fiction by women writers, partly because I imagine a narrator for a novel who is a woman. So I really need to find female voices as reference. And in fact, I read a lot. Dead authors, living authors, but always somehow return to her book for Rwanda. That book always stands out has a very distinct voice. I think that really that book and also recent novel, her recent novel The Friend. You can see if you read her work, you can see, there are so many authors who try to be clever, try to be satirical, humorous, but very often you feel a lot of things a lot of qualities are forced. But in her writing, you do feel that the elegance, sincerity, and intelligence would come together. I assume that she's going to read from her new novel, The Friend. Let us welcome Sigrid.
Yes, I am going to read a couple of pages from my new novel, The Friend. What do you need to know? There's a narrator. She is a woman. There is a dog named Apollo, and it's a 180-pound Harlequin Great Dane that she inherits when her best friend commits suicide. Something bad happens to the dog. A lesson learned early from childhood books. The animals in those stories often die, often in bad ways. Old Yeller, the red pony, and even when they don't die, even when they're not just alive but happy at the end, they suffer, often badly. Often they are put through hell. Black Beauty, Flicka, White Fang, Buck. The autobiography of Beautiful Joe, based on the life of a real dog and abounding in scenes of cruelty, begins with his brute owner slicing off Joe's ears and tail with an axe. No doubt, like many other readers, I remember crying over these books, never so hard as over poor Joe, yet never regretting having read them. Is there anything more compelling than a story about a child and an animal who bond? When I first knew I wanted to write, I was sure this was what I would write about, but I never did. When people are very young, they see animals as equals, even as kin. That humans are different, unique, and superior to all other species, this they have to be taught. Children fantasize about a world populated solely by non-humans. I liked to pretend that I was some kind of animal, a cat or a rabbit or a horse. I would try to communicate through animal sounds rather than speech and refuse to eat with my hands. At times I kept this up for so long and with such conviction that it became cause for parental concern. A game, but at the core of it something dead serious, a trace of which has been carried into adulthood, the wish not to be part of the human race. Something bad happens to the dog in Milan Kundera's novel, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. The dog is given as a pup by the main protagonist, Tomas, to his wife, Teresa, for the very same reason we are told that he married Teresa, to make up for the pain and humiliation his incorrigible womanizing causes her. Though female, the pup is whimsically named after a male character in another novel, Anna Karenina's husband. Karenin the dog hates change, loves being in the country where he makes friends with a pig, and after developing terminal cancer is put to sleep. Kundera has his own interpretation of Genesis 1:26. True human goodness can come to the fore only when its recipient has no power. Let it be seen then how the human race treats those that have been placed at its mercy. And put to this moral test, mankind has suffered a debacle so fundamental that all others stem from it. Karenin and Teresa are devoted to each other. Reflecting on their pure and selfless bond, Teresa concludes that such love is, if not bigger, nevertheless better than the corrupt, fraught, eternally disappointing, and compromised thing she has always had with Tomas. Idyllic is how Kundera describes human relationships with animals. Idyllic because animals were not expelled with us from paradise. There they remain, untroubled by such complications as the separation of body and soul, and it's through our love and friendship with them that we are able to reconnect to paradise, albeit by just a thread. Others go further. Dogs are not merely untouched by evil. They are celestial beings, angels incarnate, furry guardian spirits sent to watch over and help people live. Like the deification of cats, this belief is all over the internet and growing. It makes you wonder about people, I mean. Something very bad happens to a lot of dogs in J.M. Coetzee's novel Disgrace. The question persists, why won't David Lurie save the one, a mutt that has clearly come to love him and for which he in turn feels a special affection? Why can't that dog, a good dog, crippled but still young and apparently sensitive to music, be spared the fate of all the other unwanted dogs destroyed at the animal welfare clinic? Why, instead of keeping this one dog, does Lurie insist on sacrificing it? Remember Agent Starling in The Silence of the Lambs telling Hannibal Lecter how, as a little girl living on her uncle's ranch, she had desperately wanted to save the lambs from the spring slaughter. How she picked up one lamb and tried to run away. I thought if I could save just one, but he was heavy, so heavy. In the end, like Lurie, she could not save an animal marked for death, not even one. We know that they think, but do dogs have opinions? Kundera makes much of the fact that unlike us, animals don't feel disgust. I'm not so sure about this. Not even cats. But that dogs are not critical or judgmental is undeniably a big part of what endears them to us. This is what made educators think having kids with reading problems read aloud to dogs was a great idea. Also, perhaps, why performers like Laurie Anderson and Yo-Yo Ma have reported looking out at their concert audience and fantasizing that it's all dogs. Gratitude. I don't believe people are imagining it when they attribute this feeling to their rescue dog. I often feel that Apollo is grateful toward me. I want to know if he looks forward to things. She'll be home soon. Can't wait to eat. Tomorrow is another day. Even more, I want to know how he remembers the past. Does he have yearnings, regrets, sweet, sweet memories, bittersweet ones? With senses as keen as theirs, why couldn't dogs have Proustian moments? Why couldn't they have eureka moments, epiphanies, and so on? In the beginning, I sometimes caught him staring at me only to turn away when I looked back. Now he often rests his block of a head on my knees and tips his eyes at me with a speaking expression. What do you talk to him about? My therapist wants to know. Mostly, I seem to ask questions. What's up, pup? Did you have a nice nap? Were you chasing something in your sleep? Do you want to go out? Are you hungry? Are you happy? Does your arthritis hurt? Why won't you play with other dogs? Are you an angel? Do you want me to read to you? Do you want me to sing? Who loves you? Do you love me? Will you love me forever? Do you want to dance? Am I the best person you've ever had? Can you tell I've been drinking? Do these jeans make me look fat? If we could talk to the animals, goes the song, meaning if they could talk to us. But of course, that would ruin everything. Wow. Thank you.
You see, you should buy a copy of the book. Really, it's a beautiful, beautiful book. Okay, our final reader is Robert Pinsky. Really, he doesn't need any introduction. In fact, he's one of the most distinguished men of letters in this country, and he has published more than 20 books, I think. And really, I think I would say he's the best teacher of poetry writing in this country, because when we do admissions, I would follow the bloggers and the people they talk about whether Pinsky is going to take a leave. If Robert is not is on leave, then some people they would change their mind, they wouldn't apply, and really, see, he has been vital to our poetry students here. And in fact, he has done so much for poetry nationally. We know the favorite poem project, and there have been several wonderful volumes of poems published from that program. And also, I think he served for two terms as a poet laureate of this country. In a way, in a way, I think the nation, the country, has become part of his subject matter. That is very unique. I think. And there are not many American poets who can do that. I think, in fact, recently in an application, applicant use a word to describe Robert's poetry. I think it's very odd, but it's a really sharp, accurate word: nationness. And the applicant loves the quality, the theme of nationness in Robert's work. I think really that sums up the essence of his work, and that is very unique, very classic as well. We can trace this back to Horace and Pushkin. The idea of a nation, poetry respond to a nation. I think that is a grand gesture, and Robert has been doing that in a unique way. Let us welcome Robert.
The formula applies. The introduction is too kind, and I love it. but it is too kind. I appreciate the exaggeration. And it's as though prescient, too. I mean, Shui Fei didn't know this, but unlike previous years, I'm not going to read new work to you tonight. I've always tried to come up with something new. I'm going to read to you from a book that I wrote 40 years ago. My second book is a book-length poem in blank verse addressed to a child. It was my daughter, who was 8 when the book begins, and she's 11 years old by the time the book is over. And it's a series of addresses to this child. The book is called An Explanation of America. As I always like to say, it's not the explanation of America. It's an explanation of America. And my plan is to read from, there's a section of the book that's about the possibility of fascism rising in our country. And there's a section of the book that's about xenophobia and the force of xenophobia from the roots of our country. So I'll try to create some selections, and I'm so proud of our program and so glad to be here. To keep this from being grim or morose, I'll try to end with at least 7 or 8 lines from the very end of An Explanation of America. And this is from a section called Bad Dreams, and it has to do with the idea of America as being kind of an idea, visionary. But there are perils in living always in vision, always inventing entire, whatever paves or animates the innocent sand or snow of a mere locale. What if the place itself should seem an empty blank? As in a country huge and open and potential, the blank enlarges, swelling to concentric gusts of quiet, absorbs the imagination in a cloud of quiet, as smoke disperses through a mist of vague chimera that engulfs the breath. That quiet leads me to a stranger's dread of the place frightened settlers might invent. The customs of the people already there, the tongues they speak, what they have to drink, the things that they imagine might falter in such a place or be too few, and they would live like Cyclops, quote, with neither assemblies nor any settled customs, end quote, or Lestrygonians who consume their own kind and see a stranger as his meat and marrow, and have no real cities or cultivated farms, a man who eats the lotus of his prairie or shadow, consumed by a desire for darkness till the mind seems itself a dreamy marrow, is like those creatures of a traveler's nightmare. Even his sentiments about the deer or the grass recall man-eating Polyphemus, who, when he cracks like a movie Nazi, sheds real tears, making a sentimental speech to his pet ram. In such a place, in a place of settled customs, such a man might set up a brazen calf or join a movement, fanatical, to spite the spirit of assembly or of words, to drown that chatter and gossip and become sure like machines and animals and the earth. Such a man, neither a Greek adventurer with his pragmatic gods, nor an Indian, nor Jew, would worship not an earth or past or word, but something immanent, like a shadow. Perhaps he was once a Protestant, with a God whose hand was in every berry, every insect, cloud, not in the Indian way, but as one hand, a hand immanent above that beauty and its name. And when that hand came to him as the prairie, he beheld pure space as if it were a god or as a devil. And if he lost that hand, why wouldn't he, in his loneliness and love of thinking nothing, in his love of thinking nothing, grow eager to lose himself among a brazen crowd or in a calf or a certain landscape, or say that he sets out upon his empty plain, immanent with a quiet beyond all thought or words, and that he settles on that ground of trial to invent a mystic home, and then discovers people there, engaged upon their commerce or their gossip, at home or wandering as in an actual place, attending to their ordinary business. The ordinary passion to bring death for gain or glory, as Odysseus might feel, would be augmented and inflamed by the harsh passions of a settler. And so, why wouldn't he bring his death to Indians or Jews or Greeks, whoever stops for food and water to bustle and jangle in his tangled plain? I'll read a little bit more. Strangers. It's sort of xenophobia and anti-intellectualism is what I'm thinking about. Strangers. Okay. The universal provincial myth that sees in every stranger a mad attacker, and in one's victims, it may be, a stranger. Strangers, the foreign, who, coupling with their cousins, or with their livestock, or even with wild beasts, spawn children with tails or claws and spotted fur, ugly, and though their daughters are beautiful, seen dancing from the front, behind their backs or underneath their garments are the tails of reptiles, or the teeth of bears. So one might feel, thinking about the people who cross the mountains and oceans of the earth with separate legends, to die inside the squalor of sod huts, shanties, or tenements, and leave behind their legends or their legend of themselves broken and mended by the generations, their alien, orphaned, and disconsolate imported spooks, earth trolls, or kalakaks, or snopes, or golems, descended of Hessians, runaway slaves, and Indians, legends confused and loose on the road at night, the aliens or creatures of the movies. I'll just read from the very end of this. It is a book-length poem. There's a little prefatory poem, little poem at the end. The last section is called Epilogue Endings. If the word you, the second person pronoun, occurs, it is the child whose parents have to convey this stuff to children, is the sort of premise of the book. The founders made a union, mystic yet rational and sudden, as if suckled by the very wolf of Rome. Indentured paupers and criminals grew rich, trading tobacco, molasses, cotton, and slaves with names like horses or from Scott or Plutarch. In the mills, there was every kind of name, with even Yankee, a kind of Yankel or Dutchman. The Yankees pulled stones from the earth to farm, and when the glacial boulders were piled high, skilled masons came from Parma and Piacenza and settled on Division Street and Oak Street and on the narrow side streets between them, and in winter Mr. Deal hired Italian boys to help harvest the ice from Deal's Pond onto sledges and pack it into ice houses where it kept to be cut and delivered all summer long. The Linden Apartments stand where Deal's Pond was. But even when I was little, the Iceman came to houses that had ice boxes, and we could beg splinters to suck, or maybe even a ride, sitting on wet floorboards and steaming tarps, as far as St. Andrews or the VFW. The eagles, elks, moose, masons, each had a building. I pictured them like illustrations from Alice. As television came in, the lodges faded, but people began to group together by hobbies, each hobby with its magazines and clubs. My father still played baseball twice a week, and even after you were born, the schools and colleges were places set apart, as of another time. And one time, you performed as the child in The Winter's Tale. And at the end, as people applauded louder and louder, you stood with young girls who wore gray wigs and beards, all smiling and holding hands, as if the tale had not been sad at all, or was all a dream, and winter was elsewhere, howling on the mountains unthinkably old and huge and far away, at the far opposite edge of our whole country, so large and strangely broken and unforeseen. Thank you.
That's great. And I was in Kalamazoo last week. A professor told me that he had watched our annual reading on YouTube, and he said, "Are you still doing that?" I said, "We are going to do it next week." So we did well tonight. Thank you.